So, I get a lot of questions on my builds, and people are always interested in how you build things and how you build parts kits together, and the methods that you use and things like that. And this is particularly one kit that I get a lot of questions about. This is my PPS-43 52. It's like anytime I take it to the range, anytime I post a photo of it somewhere, people always want to know how I built it. This is a semi-automatic conversion, 100%, with a extended barrel shroud in order to keep it at the 16-inch minimum legal length for a rifle, because this one has a stock on it. This started life as a parts kit from Robert Bowman out of Florida, and I re-welded it. I converted the whole thing. I did all the work myself except for the barrel and the trigger group, which I'll go over. But that's it right there. There's not really much to them. I particularly like the 4352 because of this wooden stock. I was never really a fan of the folding stock on the PPS-43, but that's just me. This one is a 1953 dated parts kit, and I will show you all the ins and outs of how I put it together. It seems really simple in theory. I know a lot of people think that when they see these, but the hardest part about converting a open bolt submachine gun parts kit to closed bolt semi-auto is always going to be the actual bolt and the striker mechanism or hammer mechanism that you end up using. And that's the exact problem that I ended up having with this. So let me get this all taken apart, and I'll walk you through what it looks like today. After completing it and test firing it, making sure it runs and stuff like that. So in essence, this is, I would say, technically 3 parts if you want to get down to like simple terms, but there's more than that going on in here. So take the mag out. Gonna verify it's empty. All right, and then there is a latch on the back here, right there. It's a little hard to see, but you just press that forward, and then the lower swings away from the upper, just like that. You can see the trigger pack that I ended up using down in there. This is an Indianapolis ordnance, like I said. And then we'll take out the bolt right there, and then this is what the upper looks like. There is a denial bar in there. It's hard to see because it's so dark. There's a big shadow on it. And then if you look farther up, again, it's going to be hard to see, but you got the barrel and the trunnion fixed in there too. Let me see if I can get that to focus on there. Yeah, there we go. So there's the barrel, the trunnion, and the trunnion shelf right there. This is 7.62 by 25. I do have a 9mm barrel for this kit, but I just never installed it because when I was building this, 7.62 by 25 was cheaper than 9mm. So there, I got to show you the right side here, or the left side. So there's that, and I got the original PPS-43 sling for it as well. So like I said, there's not too much to them, but there's some difficult parts about converting these, and namely that's converting the bolt. And the bolt, no matter what, will always be the most difficult part, unless you have access to the correct tools. I have access to the correct tools, so this wasn't too difficult for me, but if you're a low budget home builder or anything like that, you're going to have some trouble with this. So let me kind of take this apart a little bit. The PPS uses this off-center spring right here on a guide rod to act as your ejector right there. So if you put a case on the bolt face, it will, let's see if I can get that to focus again. There we go. put a case on the bolt face. When the bolt cycles, it comes back, and that rod ejects the spent case out the side. There's also a corresponding divot inside the receiver itself to guide this along to make sure that that actually happens. So let me take this out of here. And then this is the converted bolt right here. So you can see it's got a groove in it for the denial bar right there. It's got a firing pin, floating firing pin in the front of the bolt face right there, unlike the fixed one that it comes with in the parts kit. And then here is the firing pin extension right there, and this is spring loaded too. And if you look down in the center, hard to see because I'm wearing a black hoodie, you can see the firing pin extension. There we go. You can see the firing pin extension running through that hole where the recoil spring lug goes, which means that the recoil spring lug has to be cut in order to allow everything to link up and mate up and work together. So the way that I started off this kit was I needed something to do. I was going to welding school, and I was working full-time, and I needed something to do to keep my mind occupied. There were some other things going on, and I decided I've had this kit for so long, I was like, well, you know, I might as well just get around to building it. And I'll put in all the photos of all the work and all that sort of thing, because I didn't make a video as I was doing this. I made videos of a few little snippets here and there of what I was actually doing. But what I ended up starting with was what they call a Type 2 demilled kit, which means that it's cut directly in front of the barrel trunnion, and it's cut in the middle of the barrel shroud. And then there's two more corresponding cuts, one directly behind the rear sight block, and then one directly in front of the wooden stock socket. So I used the inner diameter of this curve in the bent sheet metal receiver right here. It actually turns out is 1 1/8", so 1.125. And when I was first putting this together, this was the first weld that I actually did, this one right here in the center, and I used a 1 1/8" aluminum bar as a backer. So I got everything tacked up, and then I clamped it all rock steady to the welding table that I was using, and then clamped it to the bar, squared everything up with 1, 2, 3 blocks, got this weld done, polished it down, made it look real pretty. So cut forward to doing these two welds right here. So this guy right here, right behind the barrel trunnion and on the stock socket. I realized that I didn't set the gap on the first weld far enough. I set the gap just a little bit too tight, so I had to kind of, do a little bit of problem solving, and I ended up actually getting the KP Products welding jig, which is essentially just a perfectly sized 1 1/8" aluminum bar with a few different cuts in it, and it's got stands where you can actually hold it in a vise and cut with it, or weld with it. And it's also got a very handy feature on the very front of the jig where it goes into the trunnion area with a dowel rod that'll keep your trunnion and your barrel aligned to the rest of your receiver. And this one actually, I didn't spend too much time welding this, to truth be told, and this one actually turned out arrow straight, which is surprising. It's sheet metal, it's not very thick. So I would highly recommend getting the KP Products jig. So after I got these 3-4 sections put together, I had to figure out how I was going to do the barrel shroud and the front end and all that stuff, because the barrel that I originally got was the original length. So installing that in this semi-auto re-weld receiver with this stock would turn it into an SBR, a short-barreled rifle. And so I didn't want to have to go through the tack stamp and all that sort of thing. So what I ended up doing was I made the shroud 1/4 inch shorter by mating up the pieces and cutting them back and lapping them together. That way I had enough barrel to stick out of the front end so I could pin and weld this extended barrel shroud onto it. This is just a piece of, I believe this is Schedule 80 steel pipe that I turned down in the lathe, turned it to fit, made the corresponding larger hole in the very front of the barrel shroud in the front end, front sight block, and all that sort of thing. That way I could put it in there, install the barrel, pin it, and weld it in place. And then this is actually even welded to the front end. Right here, you can see one right there. It's not too terrible, but I much rather do this route than having to go through the SBR route. Well, especially with how the ATF runs slower than molasses. So you can see right here, there's the barrel, and then this extended shroud's been pinned and welded in place, and then it's also been pinned and welded right there. So that's how I took care of that problem. You can get 16-inch or 16 1/4 inch barrels for these particular guns, but the problem is trying to install them. What you'll end up running into, funny enough, is that it's almost impossible. There are a few people that have tricks, I'm not exactly sure what kind of magic that they used, but it's almost impossible to get that 16-inch barrel after this has been completely welded together up and through this trunnion all the way through to the front end, because it's like one of those things where it looks like it'll fit perfect, you know it's going to fit perfect, and then as soon as you try it, you realize I probably should have left off this last weld and then put the barrel in, then finish welding this. But the route that I took, I think, was much, much easier. So after I did all the welding on it, obviously I polished all the welds down inside and out. I did lots and lots of function checks with the bolt in order to make sure that everything went in nice and smooth, everything went back and forth, reciprocated really well. So there was a lot of that, a lot of individual spot grinding, and it was a lot. But it's done, it's over with, whatever. There's still a few spots, like back here at the back stock socket, I couldn't fit my grinder back in there. So I had to kind of make do with what I had, and so this weld back here is pretty rough on the inside, so sometimes the bolt will actually get stuck on that when you're charging. It doesn't affect it actually running, but when you charge it back too hard, the first time you go to chamber around, it'll get stuck on there. You have to gently bump the bolt forward and it'll run. So after I got all that done, I decided I'm going to do the hardest part, which is actually the bolt. So, and I've got some videos of actually how I did this, which I'll edit into this, or I might just make a separate video, honestly, at this point. But this is my modified bolt. So the full auto bolt doesn't have any of this going on in it. It doesn't have it doesn't have the firing pin in the face, doesn't have this extension, doesn't have that running through there, and it actually has a sear surface right here. So the first step I did was actually mill off that sear surface right there so it's nice and flat. This will not work in a full auto gun. So when you go to build, one of the big things is that your build and the parts that you use can't be backwards compatible with a machine gun or machine gun parts, which is where things get a little tricky. That's a different story for a different day, but it really has to, you really have to think about how you're going to do your build and do your machine work and all that sort of thing, so that's not possible. I remember one of the old ATF rulings was that you couldn't have these feed lips on here, and then they determined that didn't make a difference, so feed lips are on mine. Honestly, I mean, it would have taken 30 seconds with the mill to just take that right off, but less work you have to do, the better. So like I said, the first step I did was to mill off that sear surface. Second step was to mill this denial bar groove, and that is another one of those, your build and your parts can't be backwards compatible. So somebody has to be able to not only not use a full auto bolt in your gun, but also make sure that it'll never work in a full auto gun, and vice versa. So a full auto bolt will not work in this build because of this denial bar, which basically makes it so the bolt can't reciprocate, it can't move because there's a block, like a bar in the top of the receiver where it won't allow the bolt to travel enough in order to, you know, strip around, fire it, that type of thing. So that was the second step I did. The third step is trying to figure out how I wanted to go through and do the actual bolt conversion itself. So there's lots of guides online on how to do this, but this was the route that I knew that I could do, and it was the easiest for me.